Okay, so Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Zizek. This is a debate I've been looking forward to for a while. I've wanted to happen for a while. I am coming to this from the Peterson camp. I'm a huge admirer of Peterson's work, but I also really appreciate Zizek as well. Especially in interviews, he's, as a lot of people are putting it, a great conversationalist. I haven't delved enough into his books, which may be a bit over my head, as my understanding of Hegel is so rudimentary. But I've always really, really appreciated him just in dialogue, just his openness to new ideas, the kind of ideas and the kind of unique takes he has on things. So this is something I look forward to for a long while. Zizek already criticized Peterson numerous times in various articles, and I always thought they were superficial readings of Peterson or understandings of Peterson. But as probably most people will tell you, even people who are like myself are from the Peterson camp, he actually comes rather unprepared for this debate in regards to Zizek. Now, it's not necessarily his fault because, first of all, it was short notice. Second of all, they weren't supposed to be picking each other's ideas apart. The title of the discussion was something like Happiness, Capitalism and Marxism, or Happiness, Capitalism and Communism, something like that. And so Peterson went in with his opening remarks, his 30-minute opening remarks were all just about tearing down. Basically, just he analysed the Communist Manifesto, Marx's Communist Manifesto, and points out lots of glaring errors, simplicities, things taken for granted, things treated as self-evident, and kind of defends capitalism as something that's not perfect and comes with all sorts of its own problems, and not even in a trivial way, like real problems about people stacking up at the bottom, etc. But he defends capitalism as something its benefits far outweigh its problems, whatever problems it causes, and talks about, if you know of Peterson, you already know his views on this, but how the way that certain, let's say, mainstream socialists, student activists, socialist academia, etc., treat capitalism as the thing that contributes towards hierarchy and inequality, whereas Peterson sees it as a far, far, far deeper, more ancient problem, which is why he described himself as more pessimistic, I think. The reason I say he was unprepared was because I don't know a lot about Zizek. I haven't even read really any of his books, and even I know some of these things don't quite apply to his views. And he does make clear that Zizek is himself an original thinker. But I think what let down Peterson a lot is his admission when he came into this that what he did to prepare for it was to just read the Communist Manifesto again. And if I'm not mistaken, if I understand him right, I think he says he read it, last time he read it was maybe when he was in university or something, or when he was studying, and now he's recapped it again for this debate. And it seems as though, from everything I can gather from the debate, that Peterson actually knows almost nothing about what Marx himself wrote. He knows a lot about the Soviet Union, etc., the horrors of communism. He knows other people's views on Marx, I think, but he doesn't seem to be very familiar with Marx outside of the Communist Manifesto. And again, to be fair to Peterson, he does say that was a propaganda piece, and it might be an oversimplification, etc. But Zizek really puts him on the spot with some things which he challenges him on, and especially towards the end, I think it is, he says to Peterson, "You always talk about these neo-Marxist postmodernists in academia," and he's like, "Who are they? Like, who can you name some?" Because he didn't know of any that were Marxist and postmodernist and dominating in academia, and it did put Peterson on the spot. Now, to be fair, I use the same terminology as Peterson does as well, but I think what Zizek kind of calls him out for here is a real oversimplification and a blurring together of various different ideologies that different people hold, and treating people as kind of one big mass. I don't think he could even name many thinkers necessarily. Now, if I was in Peterson's position, I would have said, well, what I'm referring to is the Frankfurt School and also the French intellectuals of the 60s, 70s. And so people like Foucault, Derrida, Lacan, who Zizek owes an enormous amount to. Figures like that, Marcuse, with his repressive tolerance, etc. Now, the reason myself and Peterson are kind of in the wrong here is that I think, are really oversimplifying something, which is exactly what we don't like on this side, putting lots of people together in one box, etc. Not willingly. Peterson was perfectly, it seemed to be, he didn't deny how off guard he was caught. And I think he underestimated Zizek as an original thinker and expected him more to be a kind of Marxist dogmatist. Now, again, I don't think this was Peterson's fault. People are pointing out, people are saying, oh, he just come there with a little bit of knowledge about Marxism and that was it, and he didn't even know anything about Zizek. But the question was about capitalism, communism, and happiness, and so he's gone there making a case for which is most conducive to happiness, which is reasonable. But just in that it seems to be a lot of assumptions about what Zizek thought, just about certain alliances, and again, a lot of the sort of oversimplifications I make that you don't expect from someone like Peterson, who is, as he said, very, very careful with his words, and might have even been a bit of a humbling experience for Peterson. It seemed that way when he went over and shook his hand at the end, the way he responded to some of his unexpected answers, etc. So it was actually really, I think this might have been even enlightening for Peterson, and it might have opened some doors, or opened some new perspectives. And it's a debate a conversation rather, that definitely needs to continue. Zizek is really definitely part of this, whatever they call it, the intellectual dark web, or whatever it's called. I actually don't like that term at all, but he should be on more engaged in these debates, Zizek, with people like Peterson, people like Sam Harris, people like Dave Rubin, etc. A couple other points. Actually, no. I'm not really going to give any more points, other than I definitely understand the criticism that's being levelled at Peterson from this, because he did just came off as a kind of it was a blind spot, I think, but he just seemed underprepared for a conversation on something like this. And him and Zizek agreed on most of the things. They just have different understandings of Marx, and it's clear that, well, I'm not saying Zizek's is a correct interpretation. Peterson's knowledge wasn't enough to actually challenge Zizek on any of this stuff, and he did seem to leave him a bit speechless a few times. He talks about how not once in the Communist Manifesto is egalitarian, as in material equality, actually ever mentioned, and the only time Marx ever mentions it anyway, it's in a critique of it as a bourgeois fantasy. Now, even I don't think of this, because even though I've read the Communist Manifesto more than Peterson has actually, by the sounds of it, I still associate it with material equality, and I think it's all the things that surround communism, what we associate with it. So it'd be really interesting to give a rereading over that with that in mind, and also maybe to read a commentary from Zizek on it. Anyway, another good thing as well is this might have opened a lot of doors. So Peterson fans who are not too familiar with Zizek, or maybe just wrote him off as a radical leftist, not worth their time, might have come to find someone they actually really do agree with and identify with, and so it might have opened some doors in that direction. I don't think it would have opened doors in the other direction, because I think that a lot of the things that Peterson said in his prepared notes was just kind of elementary, just kind of anti-Marxism 101. It wasn't. It didn't really. Well, yeah, it was just an oversimplification. There's no better way I can put it, really. This also might just be something to do with my personal taste or whatever, but I also always find that Peterson is way, way, way more profound when he goes off script. or when he answers things or gets into things he wasn't expecting to get into, or goes on diversions, etc. When he's planned something for a talk, like he did with this Communist Manifesto thing, and he goes off his notes, it's always less interesting to me. I can't say why exactly. I find the same with his book. I liked his book, but to me, his lectures, which take you all down all different trains of thought and all different avenues, it's just more interesting than the book to me, and it's just more interesting than his scripted or planned out talks as well. When Peterson and Zizek actually really get into it with each other about details, about real life scenarios, etc. This is where it gets really, really interesting to me, and so I'd love to see this conversation continued somewhere in an environment like with either just the two of them or something like the arrangements that were done with Sam Harris, or something like Dave Rubin's show or Joe Rogan, something like that, where they're actually having a conversation. It's not you have 30 minutes, now you have 10 minutes, and you have this, and it's not structured like that. It's just a conversation, because they have far, 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 far more in common than Peterson realised going into this. Now, bear in mind, as I said from the beginning, I do think that Zizek is just as guilty of oversimplification too. But Peterson came off looking like the weaker intellectual in this, and I think if this was the only thing you'd ever seen of Peterson, then I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. But I don't think this was exactly his finest moment. That being said, it's not bad like some of the critics says. It wasn't one side destroys the other. It was enlightening. It was constructive. It was reminding me in many ways of that Camille Paglia conversation Peterson had a couple of years ago, a year or so ago, which was fantastic. Gee, imagine those three in a room. Imagine Zizek, Paglia, Peterson in a room. Just 4 hours on a microphone. Well, yeah, that's all I have to say about it for now. I'll probably chime in more after I've watched it a couple more times. Peace.